Hello, and welcome to DePaul Art Museum. My name is David Marizella, DPAM's Collection and Exhibition Manager. Thank you for joining us for this virtual tour of our current exhibition, Remaking the Exceptional, Tea, Torture, and Reparations, Chicago to Guantanamo, which is on view through August 7th, 2022. This exhibition features over 100 artworks made by Guantanamo Bay and Chicago police torture survivors, as well as new works by artists, activists, and advocacy groups who have spent years using artistic creation to fight for reparations, abolition, and social change. In what follows, you'll hear co-curators and participating artists Amber Ginsburg and Aaron Hughes discuss their ongoing collaboration known as the Tea Project, and learn how it informed their conceptualization of the larger exhibition. We hope that for those unable to see the exhibition in person, or for those looking to learn more, that this audio-guided tour is a helpful resource.
The first thing that you would see would be a quilt by Dorothy Burge with a very striking portrait and a name. And this is a series of quilts that moves into Gallery 1, where there are also a wall of names, which is an incomplete list of all of the John Burge torture survivors, together with portraits shown from behind in a series that Debbie Cornwall has done of former Guantanamo torture survivors that are now in countries all over the world, talking about, really this first room is about portraiture, who gets named, how important it is to be named, and also those that perhaps can't yet be seen.
So stepping from Gallery 1 into Gallery 2, this idea of naming is repeated through the 780 porcelain teacups that are displayed in the exhibition, each featuring the name of one person that has been or is still currently imprisoned at Guantanamo. And those cups are based on the story of at Guantanamo in the initial stages of the prison, 2002 through 2006, individuals in prison there weren't allowed to have anything in their cells, nothing at all. But each day, at the end of the day after dinner, they were given a styrofoam cup of tea. And this styrofoam cup became a canvas to express themselves. And so they would begin to write and draw and scrawl all over these cups. And the military considered these cups, because of that, a security threat. And so they would come and confiscate them, bring them to military intelligence to analyze, and then throw them away. And it was a very absurd process. If someone was going to scrawl a message and throw it into the ocean, it was going to get to somebody somewhere somehow. It was a little bit crazy. And every time people would pick up these cups, they would realize that they would just be scrawled all over with flowers. And so this gesture of creativity, despite all of the institutional dehumanization, this reaffirmation of individuals' humanity, despite the institutions that they're within, is what this exhibition is trying to lift up, is trying to hold the contradictions between the violence and the resistance. In that same gallery are images of ships at sea, all painted from inside Guantanamo. And one of the Guantanamo survivors, Sabri al-Qurashi, he says, at Guantanamo, depending on the place where I was, I could see and smell and hear the sea. And for me, the sea was a symbol of freedom. Also in this room are these beautiful, beautiful paintings of candles by Khalid Qasim, who painted them inside Guantanamo, where he still is incarcerated extra-legally. And there are 9 of them, one for each person that has died while imprisoned in Guantanamo. There's also a massive installation in the middle that features all the interconnections between the way tea is a habit that is embraced and taken in. It's a habit that is a part of colonialism, and it's a habit that's a part of solidarity. And this installation lifts up the way that these habits transverse and move around the world, whether that's the movement of torture practices from Chicago to Guantanamo to Abu Ghraib, to Bagram and back to Chicago or New York and then back to Guantanamo, or that's resistance movements from Chicago to Afghanistan to the UK. And so lifting up all of these spaces and the work between these two sides of this history.
Entering into Gallery 3, you're met with a series of paintings of trees, dead trees, most still standing, often in beautiful, vibrant colors. And this metaphor of the dead tree really became sort of emblematic and a part of our curatorial theme when we read Ralph Lawrence's torture letters. And throughout the whole book, Lawrence is taking 20 years of research on John Burge and torture in Chicago, and he uses the metaphor of the torture tree. And he says that the torture tree, the trunk is the use of force of continuum, the use of force continuum. The branches are the officers that perpetrate the acts of use of force, and every leaf is the individual incidents of the use of force. So in this room, there's also new research from Myra Quadja at the Invincible Institute on the relationship between the military to prison and prison to military pipeline in terms of how officers enter into forces, police forces, and they take leaves and go in the military and then return, connected also with use of force complaints. So kind of new research tracking the relationship of the inflow and outflow from the Chicago Police Department.
Stepping back through this gallery, you into the gallery 2, you see the torture tree that is knocked down and cut down. And that's a reflection of both acknowledgement of this history, but also aspirations for a different history that is then repeated as you walk outside with Lucky Pierre's amazing installation of a timeline that's mirrored across the hall is a quote by Carl Williams, Chicago police torture survivor, in which he says, "You can change the concrete, you can dig up the soil, but the history is still there. It is always in the air." And so acknowledging these histories while also imagining alternative futures is how we like to think as we move into this second floor and the second floor galleries.
I had the great pleasure of being in the gallery when Carl saw that quote, and he read it out loud and then turned around with a big, enormous smile and said, "That's me." And so it's been really powerful that so many survivors have been able to come and see the words that we learn so much from. And as you go, as Erin said, as you go upstairs to the second gallery, it's really this resistance room, which is framed by another saying by Mansour Adafi from another Guantanamo torture survivor. The arts in general are a very important, a soul language. It can be a form of resistance, a form of love, communication, history. And together with that is Mohamedou Oudslahi, also a Guantanamo torture survivor, in big letters in that room. Any expression with drawing, with poetry, with a speech, with an article is an act of peaceful resistance. And so you enter into this room and there is an entire wall of Sarah G. Ree photographs she's been documenting Chicago resistance for more than a decade. And the vibrancy of the way that people show up here is really captured in those photographs, together with a multi-year project with the Prison Neighborhoods and Art Project that teach inside Stateville with the express mission to bring that work outside to families, to all of us. And this is a series of classes that imagined if you took all the population of the US carceral system and the budget that accompanies that system, you would be both larger than a state and larger than some small countries. And so really imagining a state beyond the states that we have. And it's an expression of statecraft through banners, dances, music, all different forms, together with Damon Locks, who also teaches in that program, but took that assignment up himself and created these 9 new works for the exhibition, himself imagining what this 51st free state can be.
Also in this room is the amazing collaboration between Jamal Osmi and Deborah Cornwall, in which Debbie's photographs from Guantanamo are spoken back to by Jamal. Debbie brought those photographs to Jamal, where he's been released, and he then graffitied them and wrote into them. And in many ways, they're humorous satires on the state of Guantanamo. And that whole ability to speak back to these institutions is really essential. Also, speaking back to those institutions and lifting up this idea of alternative futures, we step into the back gallery, and in that room is bookmarked both sides by these 2 speculative reparations ordinance. One is by the Chicago Torture Justice Memorials and Joy Mogul, and that is the speculative reparations for John Burge torture survivors that then became law in Chicago. And Chicago was the first city in the country that passed the reparations ordinance for racially motivated police violence. And although that reparations ordinance is not perfect in any way, it is something that we can build from and learn from, and a step that in building a craft of reparations and taking on this idea of that craft of reparations and exploring these themes is a speculative reparations ordinance for Guantanamo torture survivors. And within this bookends are the powerful drawings of Abu Zubaydah and Daryl Cannon of their torture. And a big part of, as we've interviewed all these torture survivors and talked to them over the last years, a major part of the work is acknowledging the truth of what has happened and that people don't believe them. And so these documents become their way to tell the truth as they become court testimonies. These graphic images, which we were very unsure about showing, but showed because of the encouragement of Abu Zubaydah and of the Chicago Torture Justice Memorials, they're responded to by the beautiful work by Ghalib al-Bahani of these 2 legs touching and embracing that he made when he was inside Guantanamo, and more works by Khalid Qasim about imagining his home from Guantanamo in Yemen, and other surreal imaginations of tea and loss and connection that is found in his beautiful, powerful pieces. Building on this idea of craft and reparation, we step into the final hall where we're greeted by Mashan's installation.
Mashan Ali Hendricks has been spending over a decade working with Resolution 194, which was, and doing restorative justice work generally for more than a decade. And House Resolution 194 was a very quiet apology that came out during the Obama administration, less than 10 years ago, but he's been working with it since. And it is the first step towards accountability, which is the apology part. It doesn't have any actual recompense or resolution, but also it's not very well known. And so he has taken this work and has done workshops, has written into a document that kind of explains that, and then very provocatively has written questions on the wall which ask whether, are we healed from slavery? Are we not healed from slavery? What would it take to be healed? This is an image that you're looking at where it was just the beginning. I was in the museum today and it's almost like completely chalked in, and people are really taking up these questions. There's really a lot of connections between Chicago activists sort of throughout the museum that really hold the kind of curatorial premise, which is that we have been holding conversations over tea as a technology that is extremely slow, but what it does is it builds relationships. And so this exhibition is the works of former and current Guantanamo torture survivors, works that have been allowed to leave Guantanamo, paintings, as well as organizations that have been fighting for justice and reparations in Chicago for over a decade.